Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Criminally Basic podcast. I'm your host, Megan.
And I'm Hannah.
Today, we're delving into a case that has stumped authorities for years. 2 lives were tragically and brutally taken, and with no leads, this cold case runs the risk of remaining cold forever. Today, we'll be discussing the murders of Mary Cooper and Susanna Stodden.
I haven't really heard much about this. I think you've told me a little, but I don't really know about it.
Yeah, it is tragically unreported, and I'm really excited to talk about it and hopefully bring a little bit more attention to it. July 11th, 2006 began as an exciting day for Mary Cooper and her daughter Susanna Stodden in Snohomish County, Washington.
Every murder's in Washington.
It really does seem to be. I didn't mean to find a case from Washington, but I was really drawn to this one, and when I discovered that it was in Washington, just knew I had to do it.
Yeah.
The 56-year-old school librarian was looking forward to going on a hike with her 27-year-old eldest daughter, and it was really going to be her first real taste of summer. Now, I didn't know this, but apparently school librarians work farther into the summer ordering books and organizing things, so this July 11th excursion was really going to feel like summer.
I didn't know that school librarians actually worked longer.
No, and I think it depends on the school and kind of on the school district, but with where Mary worked, yeah, she worked further into the summer.
I have a couple family members that are school librarians, and I didn't even know that.
I don't have any librarians in my family, but I definitely come from a family of teachers. And yeah, I was surprised to learn that too. According to those that knew them, both Mary and Susanna loved nature. In fact, according to Herald Net, which is a Washington news source, Susanna had graduated with a degree in environmental studies from Western Washington University in 2001 before moving to Nepal to teach. Now, I couldn't find exactly what she taught there, but it is a known fact that she was in Nepal for some time.
So she could have been there for science-y things.
Yeah, I couldn't find exactly what she was there for. I'm sure that information is out there somewhere, but with how underreported this case is, I'm kind of struggling for sources. Susanna had moved back to the U.S. and was working with a nonprofit teaching children about nature. To Susanna, working with nature wasn't just a hobby or even a passion. It went far beyond that to her. She felt as though teaching people about the beauty of nature and the world around them was her true calling in life. She was all about sustainability, riding her bike to and from wherever she could, and really just taking care of the world.
Yeah, and she was doing it way before I don't want to say movement, but before it really got popular nowadays.
Yeah, and really before it became trendy. Just like her daughter, Mary loved the outdoors. She had grown up hiking with her own father and really never saw an excuse to stay inside. Even rain was welcome to her. She and her husband David were described as a spunky and eclectic couple. They met at college and they married soon after they graduated. The home that they shared was complete with a garden in the backyard. David grew vegetables and fruits on one side, and on the other side, Mary tended to her flowers.
That's so sweet. I love that.
It is so cute. They were described as being the perfect match for each other. And after having 3 daughters, they felt as though their outdoorsy family was complete. So, on the morning of July 11th, 2006, the mother-daughter duo set out for their hike. They left in the family's 1997 Dodge Caravan with plans to hike Mount Pilchuck, which is a trail that they frequently went on during family hikes. David said goodbye to the 2 women, unaware that they wouldn't be coming home at 4:30 like they said they would. For David, the rest of the day was pretty normal. Reportedly, he went to help one of his daughters fix up a house before returning home around 5:30. He noticed that Mary wasn't home, but as I'm sure all of us would, he quickly filled in the blanks with the most likely scenarios as to why she wasn't there.
Yeah, so she could have probably just been hiking too long and lost track of time. And no one ever thinks the worst when
Absolutely.
That happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've gone home when I was living with my parents. I've gone home expecting to see them home and didn't, but you just assume that, oh, they're at the grocery store or they had to run out for something. You never think that it's anything more than something innocent.
You don't think the worst. You always think they're just running late or something.
Definitely. That's exactly what David thought. So he grabbed his bike and he left to go to a friend's house for a bike ride. David and his friend were planning on going on a long-distance cycling event, and I couldn't actually find which one it was, but it was supposed to go from Seattle, Washington to Portland, Oregon. I went ahead and looked up how far this was, and it's about a 170-mile journey.
Ooh, that's a long way on a bike.
It is. By car, it's about a 2.5 hour drive, and I can't even imagine how many hours it would be on a bike. So David went biking with his friend, and then after the bike ride and dinner, he returned home around 8:30. And this is when he realized something was wrong. The family Dodge Caravan was still not back, and his wife was nowhere to be seen.
Very, very scary.
Immediately, according to Harold Nett, he called both Mary and Susanna, but neither one of them answered their phones. Knowing that they had been hiking, he feared that they had gotten hurt on the trail or had potentially been in a car accident. He then called the Washington State Patrol and the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, but he said in an interview that he wasn't met with the response that he was expecting. According to David, he got the sense that they knew something, but they weren't telling him. After the unsuccessful and really frustrating phone calls, David decided that he'd had enough. He packed up his truck with a few survival items like his backpack and an axe and prepared to set out and search for them himself. Instead, he was met with detectives pulling into his driveway.
That is so scary. I can't even imagine what's going through his head at that time.
Earlier that day, both Susanna and Mary had been found dead. Their bodies had been found on the Pinnacle Lake Trail by another hiker who, at first, didn't think they were dead. Their bodies weren't positioned in the fetal position or laying on their backs. They were kind of kneeling off to the side of the trail.
Like, kneeling? Not like...
Yeah, they reportedly were hunched over. And this hiker, when he came upon them, thought that they had just kind of stepped off to the side and were maybe dealing with an injury or just taking a break. But when he got closer to them, he realized they were dead. Immediately afterward, he went and contacted authorities. And actually, authorities originally suspected that they might have been attacked by wild animals, but the autopsy would later show that the two women had been shot in the head. Back with David later that evening, he was shocked and confused. The Pinnacle Lake Trail was way out of the way from the Mount Pilchuck Trail where they had originally been planning to go. Apparently, they had changed their route and decided to head to the Pinnacle Lake Trail instead, but no one knew of this change of plans, not even Susanna's roommate, who had actually been invited along that morning.
Oh, wow. She probably thought she could have been one of the people that were killed.
Absolutely. And I, again, couldn't find very much on her, but from what I did find, she was absolutely stricken with grief and guilt because she thought that perhaps if she had gone with them, they wouldn't have changed their route, or maybe they wouldn't have been attacked, because even for someone to take on two fully grown women, that's a pretty brash thing to do.
Very, especially, you said it was broad daylight, correct?
Correct.
So that's very brash and very cocky.
Definitely. And even though, I mean, they were in the middle of nowhere and there were no witnesses, taking on two women is, really cocky, but maybe a third could have scared off whoever it was.
Yeah, because usually these killers don't attack big groups of people. And I mean, three's not a huge group of people, but...
But we're talking about three fully grown women here.
Yeah.
And three fully grown women who were who were used to hiking.
Yeah, these aren't just people going on their first hike. They've done this for probably since the daughter was born.
Yes, they absolutely did. They were a very outdoorsy family. All of them were in good shape and could take care of themselves. So the fact that they were both taken down by what is assumed to be a single person is very surprising.
It had to be a sneak attack or something.
Oh, we'll get into that.
Ooh.
Well, let's rewind and talk about David for a second. As David was being told the worst news of his life, the detectives were checking his odometer and his gas gauge. Now, I don't think this is too odd. When someone is murdered, the police immediately begin their investigation with the people who are closest to them.
Oh, absolutely, because usually most times, not all times, but most times it's someone close, husband, child, someone related somehow.
Yes, and especially when it's two people in the same family. And even though he had an alibi and that alibi has been proven, police had to start somewhere, so they started with him. When trying to figure out a timeline, they found through eyewitness testimony that Mary and Susanna had arrived at the trail at around 10 a.m. A couple who were hiking that day actually stopped to chat with them and even offered for the women to join them. but the two politely declined as they were just planning on walking to the lake and back, whereas this other couple were going to do some hiking on the mountain as well. So they arrived at the head of the trail at 10 a.m., and the hiker who found them discovered their bodies around 2:30 that afternoon.
Ooh, so that's a pretty big time difference.
It is a pretty big time difference. And what's more surprising is that no one saw or noticed anything suspicious at all.
No one, anyone.
There were two hikers that said that they may have heard thunder, and that's actually thought to be the gunshots later on in the investigation. But other than that, there was absolutely no one who saw or heard anything even remotely suspicious. This case has absolutely stumped authorities. When trying to find a motive, there doesn't seem to be a clear one. Nothing was stolen, not a single person in their lives could think of someone who would want to hurt them, and additionally, their bodies were found 2 miles into the trail. This entire trail was 4 miles to the lake and 4 miles back, and they were found halfway to the lake. So if someone had followed them, they would have had to have followed them for 2 miles through kind of some difficult terrain just to kill them for an unknown reason. This trail was pretty popular, and while it was during a weekday, there was very little attempt to even conceal the bodies.
I wonder if either they just stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen, or if it was per se a experienced hiker or something that was just, I don't know,
Yeah, you're exactly right. A clear motive still hasn't been found to this day, and while some people have proposed that they could have stumbled upon something like a drug deal, for instance, in that area at the time, there was a lot of meth and marijuana dealing going on in that area. And while marijuana at least doesn't have the same stigma today that it did back then, methamphetamine is still very much illegal.
Very.
And people will go to extremes to protect either their business or their addiction.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Something else that has been frustrating to authorities is that they have not been able to find any DNA. Now, this crime took place outside, so there's going to be DNA from a variety of things, and the trail was well hiked, so anybody who maybe turned to spit or one of their hairs fell out, I know that my hair falls out all the time.
That's well, same.
There was a lot of DNA at the scene, but none of it matched anything.
And like, how do you go about ruling that out? Like everyone's, when there's probably at least hundreds, if not thousands of people's DNA all through there.
No, absolutely. And I did a little bit of digging, and it really kind of reminded me of the murders in Delphi of Abby and Libby.
Yeah.
That murder took place outside as well. And I did a little bit of research in them because I follow that case very closely. And one of the lead detectives said that they had to spend hours and hours combing through every little thing because they couldn't leave any leaf unturned.
I can't imagine how hard that must be on detectives and investigators. There's so much out there.
There is. I don't know exactly how they go about collecting that evidence, but it's definitely an ordeal. Yeah. And to go through that ordeal to really have nothing at the end of it is just more frustration.
Oh, I would imagine, especially when it seems like, I know this didn't happen, but like a ghost did it.
Yeah, there are no eyewitnesses. There's no clear motive. They asked the public for tips, and police did receive a fair number of tips, but unfortunately none of them ended up leading anywhere conclusive. It's like this person just came, killed them, and left without a single trace.
I don't know why that makes me think of if Son of Sam, if there weren't any witnesses to that, I don't think he would have been caught.
No, and one of the theories that has actually been proposed is that Susanna and Mary were victims of serial killer Israel Keyes, who, for anybody who doesn't know, was a serial killer who operated about between 2009 to 2012. He has 6 confirmed victims to his name, but the FBI suspects that that number is closer to 12.
I almost equate him to, per se, the modern day Ted Bundy in that sense.
He was someone who could come, kill a person, and leave without a single trace. A lot of his victims before his final one, where he was caught, were thought to have either just gone missing because there was no body left behind, or they did find a body, but there was no evidence to support anybody doing it.
I take back my Ted Bundy comment. We'll go more Zodiac, kind of.
Yeah, that's really applicable.
Yeah, because it's been how many years? Like close to at least 50 plus years since Zodiac happened, and they've not been able to catch anything.
Right. And at this point, authorities are pretty sure that Israel Keyes was not involved in this case, but it is technically still a possibility.
It's almost like how they, back in 70s, whenever Ted Bundy was active, if there was a murder, they're like, oh, Ted Bundy did it.
Yeah, definitely. Israel Keyes has kind of become the modern day Ted Bundy or another similar scapegoat like that. We have these theories, but police didn't have those theories back in 2006. So, according to Q13 Fox, David became the not suspect. He was never named a suspect, but they had to vet him and make sure that he wasn't involved.
They're like, I don't want to say they got tunnel vision, but they're like, since we have no one else, let's look at him.
Absolutely, and I don't blame them for doing that because you have to confirm that the people closest to them first weren't the perpetrators. But David ended up taking 3 polygraphs between 2006 and 2018. The first 2 came back as inconclusive, but he did end up passing the final one in October of 2018.
Which I just don't hold any true value into polygraphs anymore.
No, I agree. Polygraphs measure stress. And if your wife and eldest daughter were just gunned down in the middle of nowhere and there are no other suspects other than you, you're going to be pretty stressed.
Yeah, I would be worried if you weren't stressed. I think what I really judge more is if they're willing to take one or not.
I think that can say a lot. I would never take one without a lawyer present. And I think people give polygraphs a lot more credit than they're worth.
Oh, definitely.
Take one if you have to, but take it with a lawyer present. Within the same article that I found from Q13 Fox, David said, quote, "It's kind of insulting when someone wants you to take a polygraph when it's your own family. And since I'd already taken it twice, I didn't want to take it again. They pretty much said that they weren't going to work on the case until I took a polygraph, so I finally decided to take it." End quote.
That is rude.
No, I totally agree. I think that they were just so desperate for any sort of lead that when he didn't pass the first 2 polygraphs, let's make him keep taking them until he passes. And fortunately, he did pass the third one, and he has officially been cleared, but it took a long time to get that result. Unfortunately, there are no suspects in the case. David was cleared. Authorities are pretty sure that Israel Keyes was not involved, and there was nothing found at the crime scene that could indicate another person. It has been almost 14 years since Susanna and Mary were tragically murdered on what was supposed to be a nice summer day out. Their ashes have been spread in the places where they loved most: Mount Kilimanjaro, the Colorado River, sprinkled in the ocean, and the garden at the home that David and Mary shared. It's thought that only one person truly knows the details of what happened, but they're not coming forward. This case may be solved in the future, but as the years pass, it tends to look less and less likely. However, as anyone in the true crime community knows, this isn't the end.
Megan, let's go solve a murder.
Let's solve a murder. Thank you all for listening to A Criminally Basic Podcast. If you want to find more, find us at A Criminally Basic Podcast on Instagram and Twitter.
And check out our sources as well as photos on our website, www.acriminallybasicpodcast.com.